Hello friends, Jenkins Dota here, bringing you another Dota 2 video on behalf of DotaAlchemy.com, and this video is going to be part of the farming video series, and it's going to be on how to come back if your game sucks in terms of farm. So in Dota, sometimes you have a shit game. That is just how it goes. Sometimes it's because you personally fucked up and did something you shouldn't, or sometimes it's because you're one of the heroes who naturally needs to get fucked up in order to win the game. In Dota, you don't win every lane. If you do, it's probably a stomp. There's not much to be talked about, but in most reasonable games, one or two lanes will lose. Mostly what happens is you'll have one lane that really wins, one lane that really loses, and then another lane that goes relatively even. That's just how it goes. On a typical Dota map, somebody's got to get the short end of the stick, and it's very important to know how to react if that is you. So I've come up with a handy flowchart with some examples and replays that you can hopefully use to figure out how you should come back in a game of Dota. Number 1, allow your team to fight or split push elsewhere and take the space from them that they're making. Arguably the most common way to come back in a game of Dota as an individual hero is to simply take space from your team. You can only do this if your team is actually providing space, because obviously there needs to exist space to take in order to take it. And you don't want to do this if somebody is higher farm priority than you. And I don't necessarily just mean a carry. I mean, it could be a support. Somebody could be close to an item. For example, if you're at like 35 minutes into a game and your carry anti-mage is split pushing, that is a hero that is very capable. Once he gets a Manta and a Battle Fury, because he's so difficult to kill, he can split push and take what would be considered very, very difficult farm to take for every other hero in the game. He can occupy the really hard areas of the map, and he can take space, which leaves safe farm somewhere on the map. And essentially the reason for that is because there is just not enough heroes to cover the entire map in terms of, you know, killing a hero if they're farming a specific area. You just can't. Even in the most desperate of games, there's a jungle that you can farm somewhere. It's either the offlane jungle, maybe the enemies, maybe yours. There's a jungle that you can farm in almost any game. So there is space on the map. It just depends on who should be the one taking it at that point in the game. Sometimes it's not you. And this space creation role rotates. As you can see in this game, I started initially taking the space, but then since the enemy team was occupying my jungle and I kind of wanted them out of there because I didn't want them to take that tower after they killed a few creep waves after killing my team, I was like, okay, Ursa and Veno have kind of a similar farm priority. Maybe I'll make some space for him to potentially take Roche, get some items up. I farmed a little bit. I pushed out the lane. Strategically, I was okay with pushing up there. Obviously, in Dota, you don't want to die, but if that's what it takes in order to essentially make space for my team, that is fine, because I took some space and we're kind of doing this yo-yo, me and this Ursa, for, you know, strategic reasons more so than item reasons. But, like I said, there are very good item reasons and timing reasons that you should give space to your team, even if you're a carry. So if you look at Virtus Pro play, who they're arguably the best team in terms of doing this and one of the best teams in the world right now, they constantly switch what hero is getting the safest farm on the map depending on the situation. And a lot of people think, oh, an anti-mage constantly taking the safest farm on the map, right? He's a hard carry. Completely wrong. Virtus Pro, if they have an anti-mage, they might actually send him down a lane intentionally to die to make space for a goddamn Crystal Maiden to get a Glimmer Cape if they deem it that important in a game. Some really common space requiring situations are when like a Warlock needs level 6, for example, when a Slardar needs to get up a Blink Dagger or an Earthshaker needs to get up a Blink Dagger. These heroes are not an anti-mage, or not a Terrorblade. They're not these super farm dependent heroes. But with that being said, they're actually higher on the farm priority than those heroes because they need those items so desperately. They need those levels so desperately. So essentially what I'm saying is, in a game of Dota, sometimes you shouldn't be the hero that's taking the space, but you should also be very comfortable if you got fucked over in the laning phase, which happens in a lot of games. Maybe it's actually time for your carry to make space for you. Or if you're a carry, maybe it's time for you to allow your offlane Axe to come back because he got screwed over in the laning phase, because somebody's going to, right? And you didn't, so essentially make space for him once you can, trade off that space creation, that space taking role, and get a lot of farm in the game. So the risks of this is that if your team fights fuck up, basically if your team like tries to fight elsewhere or split push elsewhere and they just feed, and then like you run down a lane and feed as well, it can quickly snowball out of control, because basically if you're a hero that doesn't farm jungle really quickly or hit like a notable power spike, then all of a sudden every single hero in the game is behind and not you, because guess what? If your team is split farming and if your team is fighting elsewhere, you're not there. So chances are, unless they're very strong, they're not going to succeed. And if you're just not farming jungle quickly, or you end up dying or something like that, and it just doesn't turn out well, then you just sacrifice your team, but there's no reward for it because you fuck something up, because you're a slow jungler, because you died in the lane. For example, like I died in the top lane. If there was no other recourse in this game other than me farming, and I died like that when my team was making space, it'd be really, really bad. Like, for instance, if I was an anti-mage. But it wasn't like that in this game. We actually ended up winning. Number 2, fight with your team, in particular with a strong hero. So this is something that you can do at any point in the game, even if it's in the laning phase and you go for a gank or something like that. But essentially you can have a hero that's doing extremely well in the laning phase, or a hero that's doing extremely well in the game, and all you need to do is go to them and increase their strength, and you'll win the game. So in this game that you guys see in front of you, basically I was feeding. If you can't tell from the 6 and 16 KDA, I wasn't having a good game, but I still was very effective, simply because I was backing up this Clinks and I was scything people for the Clinks. And ironically, this guy's name is Go To Me. I don't think that has anything to do with what I'm saying, but basically I was like, okay, I got fucked over in the laning phase, I'm not having a good game, but I still can be effective if I buff up this Clink. So basically, sometimes the best option in a game of Dota is simply to think about, okay, what is the strongest hero on the map right now? I'm going to move to them and get comeback gold by virtue of getting the assist gold that they're going to give you from killing people. So Ursa is a really good example of this. A lot of the time Ursa ends the laning phase and he has like 20 kills. Well, not actually 20, but he has a lot of kills. You know, this hero gets a lot of kills. You can a lot of the time buff up like an Ursa. A Clinks is another great example of this hero. They're really excellent if you buff them up. And even like a feeding Pudge is 10 times as useful when he's playing with like an owning Clinks or an owning Ursa. And Necro with my Scythe, if I play with the Clinks and I, you know, just scythe people who are low, then I'm going to be very effective despite being kind of useless in the game. And basically, if you can buff somebody up and make them way, way more useful and they're already really strong and you think that you can fight and win with somebody, then you may as well just go to them. Even though you had a fucked up game, it doesn't matter because you can just get a bunch of comeback gold by virtue of the assist gold. And the unfortunate thing, though, is this option is only really available if you think your team is capable of fighting. And usually if you got fucked over, your team is only capable of fighting if somebody's like completely crushing. And in this game, the Clinks was, I believe, like, yeah, 21 kills. So this guy's completely owning, right? So this makes sense in this scenario, but doesn't always make sense. And that's what the other options cover when this doesn't make sense. But basically, if somebody's completely crushing, you may as well go to them and just buff them up and give them a really strong game, because you can just win off the back of somebody like this for sure. So the risks are that if your strong hero dies and you group up with them, chances are you probably get 5-man wiped, and sometimes you're better off actually allowing them to fight alone and then take the space elsewhere on the map. And that's especially true if you're not going to actually contribute anything to the fight and you could use the farm to contribute later. For example, in this game, I actually could contribute to the fight just because I have Reaper's Scythe, but if I was playing a hero like Enchantress, I might not go to my team simply because I don't know if I can contribute and make this Clinks any stronger than he already is, and it would probably be better if I just take the space that he's making and make space for him instead. Number 3, and the second tactic actually leads into this one perfectly. You can switch to more of a support role, or rather, reduce your farm/item priority on your hero if you feel like you're going to be useless and never come back. So basically, the idea behind this one is just that you can have effectiveness with very cost-effective items, so you don't really need to come back in Dota. Rather, you can kind of build smaller items that are still very, very effective, because that's kind of how Dota works. Items that are more expensive are only marginally more effective. They are more effective, I'm not saying they're not, but they're only marginally more effective. Items like Lotus, Glimmers, Force Staves, these are very effective items despite not being extremely expensive and easy to build up to, but maybe a Radiance is better in general, like a Necrophos, for example. But in this game, I had died like 4 team fights in a row or something, and I felt like I was falling off. So like I said, I wanted to get a Radiance, I wanted to go for a Dagon, I wanted to be that kind of carry hero, but I figured since my PL was really strong, and since Zeus and PL are really great late game heroes, I can kind of win off the back of them, and I can be effective still while dying, make myself a little tankier, harder to kill in those fights, and kind of fight more and have more of a chance of winning in the current time rather than, you know, going really late or taking any space. I could keep fighting essentially, and I could do that just with more supporty items. So obviously I'm going to be less effective in the late game in terms of hard carrying, but I'm going to be more effective now, and honestly I'll probably be more effective in the late game just because I'll get more items, because I'll contribute to fights now, because we'll get huge as a team, and then eventually I can sell these items and pick up the late game items. So this is also something that you can do, especially if you have supports that can very easily carry the game. So just because of how Dota scales right now, there is, you know, heroes like Crystal Maiden, Windranger, all of these heroes, like, they're, you know, typical support heroes, but they're very, very fucking amazing in the late game. Like, these heroes are insane once you get some items up on them. And so you can abuse that. You can abuse the fact that you can essentially allow another hero to take more of a core role. For example, in this game, Tramp Protector has been getting a lot of farm, and obviously that's going to be off the back of me building these more supporty items. He can get Aghanim Scepters, Meteor Hammers, and things like that, and it's okay because I have the support items. He doesn't need to get them because I'm going for them, and that was because I figured that if I don't do that, I'm never really going to come back. And as a result, in this game, I think I was very, very effective. And once I started building into these kind of smaller, more supporty items, and, you know, less of the Dagons and Radiances, I actually was able to be effective and not die in these fights. So the risks to this is that you essentially switch to more of a support role. You switch to less of a farm priority, aka you build the smaller items, the more cost-effective items, and it just doesn't matter. Like, you go into a game and it just goes late, but the items didn't really help you survive. You just kind of fucking die anyway, like you saw me just die there. And then you just lose Dota because you don't have a core, or you don't have a hero that should have higher farm priority, and those support items didn't help in the early game. So basically what can happen is that sometimes those items that you build just aren't that effective. Like if you get a Glimmer in a game, that it's just not good to get a Glimmer or a Force Staff and you just don't use it correctly. The risks of doing that is that you're going to go late game and maybe you'll have like a Force Staff or a Glimmer. For example, with this Tiny, you can see he has a Glimmer because he's in poverty mode. You might have a Tiny that ends up with a Glimmer and he's just useless in the late game because it's a Tiny with a Glimmer. And it wasn't very effective and didn't make up for the fact that he wasn't able to have a good game. Number 4, risk your life and take the unsafe farm on the map. And what I mean by that is that you should cut creep waves and try to be as absolutely annoying as possible for the enemy team. Typically, this is a tactic that you should do in the side lanes, and the reason for that is because in the middle lane, if you cut a creep wave, or for that matter, even push a creep wave out, it's very likely that you'll kill 1 or 2 creep waves, and then you'll be at the enemy tower, just because the mid lane is so small. Whereas in the side lanes, it can take 3 or 4 creep waves to get to the enemy base. So if you're setting up in a lane, being as annoying as possible, hiding in trees, cutting waves, using your spells to kill creep waves instantly, then you're actually going to get through 3 or 4 creep waves, which is going to give you obviously a lot of net worth, and then you're going to force the enemy back to their base, where they're going to need to get through those creep waves again, except in the other direction, in order to get anything out of killing you. So basically, this way of farming is obviously incredibly risky because you're just playing in enemy territory, you're playing in a very dangerous area of the map, you're taking the unsafe farm, but the benefit to it is that if they do kill you, it is a lot less worth it than if they kill you farming your own jungle, because if you're farming your own jungle and they kill you, they probably take racks, they probably take towers, because it's in your jungle. It takes 10 seconds to walk from your jungle and get the creep wave into the tower. It's very, very simple. So basically the gist of this one is that sometimes in Dota, somebody on your team, like an Anti-Mage or a Terrorblade, or in this particular replay that we're watching, a Drow Ranger, needs to take the safe space on the map. Obviously, we already talked about how it's actually kind of dangerous to take that safe space in terms of if the enemy team kills you, they just walk to your base and take it. But there's these games where, like, you just can't be that person taking it anyway, so it's not even worth considering. Like, I'm Batrider, right? I'm not going to take this Drow's farm, the safe space, because she's not going to be split pushing. I can do that a lot better than her, so I'm going to do that. Hell, even if you're an Anti-Mage or a Drow and your team isn't split pushing and making space in these games where you just can't fight the enemy team and you're behind, it's better that somebody does the job than nobody to do it, because you're going to lose if nobody makes space, because you're going to fall behind on every single hero. Your enemy team is going to get an advantage, take Roshan, and they're just going to completely destroy you. Whereas you could do this really aggressive kind of just literally not trying to fight and just kill creep waves as much as you can in the place they don't want you to, and you'll get a bunch of farm and then actually make space for your team. As you can see in this replay, the Drow is mid-farming, the Lina is farming because I'm doing this and because I'm being essentially an asshole in this lane. The risks of this are that you can bleed deaths if the enemy team is so strong that they can actually just deal with you split pushing with like 1 or 2 heroes. The reason that this is such a, I don't want to call it low risk, but it's a lot less risky than to, for example, run at the enemy team in your jungle and try to fight them. But the reason that it's lower risk than that is because a lot of the time the enemy team needs to send so many people to deal with you being an asshole that even if they kill you, it's probably going to be of value to you, at least because you're playing from behind. However, I do have to say that this is a very, very solid tactic, and it's actually quite rare that an enemy team is capable of killing you with very few heroes in Dota, at the very least in this meta, and for a lot of the previous metas, it's been very rare that the enemy team can actually deal with you without using 5 heroes, and using 5 heroes to chase one enemy around is usually not good at all. So basically, this is a way to make the enemy team invest a lot of resources into killing you, freeing up space for your team, which makes up for the fact that you're behind, and then also you won't be behind because you're going to be getting a lot of farm because lane farm is extremely valuable. Option number 5, and this is the worst case scenario tactic. Get a comeback Midas or something along those lines, hold high ground, and hope for the goddamn best. It's okay to do this. It is something that you need to be comfortable with simply because in Dota, there is always a way to come back. You can always get rapiers, you can always hold megas, no matter what heroes you have, almost. And all you need to do in the late game, like if you do end up holding out until 50-60 minutes, all you need to do to win the game is run down the middle lane, because it's a very small lane, take all the towers, ignore the racks, and thrown them with rapiers, or thrown them with necrobooks and desos or something like that. No matter what, that is still something you can do, and what matters in Dota is not kills, it's not barracks, it's the throne. So you can always win in Dota because the late game, it doesn't matter about racks, nothing matters. Really, buybacks matter in the late game. If you can kill somebody that's important without buyback, you just win, period. So no matter what, you shouldn't give up, and this is a tactic you should only employ if you're getting completely fucked, but it's still something that you should be willing to pull out in the worst situations.